Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where tonight we're going to be talking about all things fishing. There are over 2 million anglers in Minnesota, fishing 158 species, although some of those are species that we don't necessarily want in our lakes, fishing 3,800,000 acres and over 5,400 fishable lakes. So tonight we're going to be talking about not how to catch fish, but some of the really interesting things that are happening in the fishing area. We're going to start our program this evening again with Annie Cook and a little piece about fishing.
Fishing is part of Minnesota's culture, and the Department of Natural Resources hopes to carry on that tradition.
I seldom hear when fishing is really good, because nobody really wants to tell me their secret lake, but I find out eventually.
Success varies from season to season, and those changes have to do with temporary conditions.
The day-to-day, season-to-season fluctuations in fishing success is largely due, I think, to weather.
Many think a good fishing season depends on walleye, but for central Minnesota, those prize fish aren't a natural occurrence in the lakes.
Most of the lakes around here are stocked lakes. Mille Lacs Lake is the exception. But most of the lakes that we stock walleyes in, we keep those fisheries, you know, as you say, up as much as we can.
Walleye don't hurt the ecosystem, but they're not essential like other fish.
Fish in a lake that are from that lake, let's say it's bass or sunfish. You know, if they're there naturally, if we don't have to stock them, they're going to maintain themselves.
In Minnesota, there are 140 species of fish. 20 of those, however, are invasive species. So the DNR is trying to boost up the populations of the natural fish and get rid of the fish that don't belong. Through posted signs, the DNR hopes to keep deadly diseases out of the lakes. They're also working with homeowners to keep shorelines fish-friendly.
That's where they spawn. They also brood their young. Some species, like what's called a centrarchid, which is a nest builder, the bass and sunfish and crappies, they build nests in that fairly shallow water.
Shoreline management is part of the long-term plan for the DNR, but so is helping local anglers hook that prize mount. For Lakeland News at 10, I'm Annie Cook.
My guest this evening is Tim Brastrup, who is the Area Fisheries Supervisor in central Minnesota. We can talk for a moment about the area that he's working in, but he is truly an expert in fishing. I have known Tim for a number of years, and I've actually had the opportunity to be in the field with him a few times to see what it is he does. And I can tell you it isn't all glamour work. It's sometimes getting down and getting your hands and feet dirty, pulling out logs and stuff from the beavers that trap or plug up the streams and the creeks that we're trying to keep open. But welcome to the show, Tim. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Ray. It's good to be here.
And maybe you could just tell us briefly, what does an area fishery supervisor do?
Well, I've got several staff. We've got 8, a secretary, an assistant manager, and 6 other staff. And what our job is, you know, we work in the Crow Wing County and the Southern Cass and other 4 townships in Upper Cass County. And it's our job to manage the people's fish. Essentially, the Constitution makes us do that.
And how many area supervisory offices are there?
There's 28. 28 field stations, 4 regional offices, and 5 cold water hatcheries.
And in your particular area, how many lakes are you responsible for sort of taking care of?
Okay, we got up to 450.
450 lakes. And how far north does your particular region go?
We go in the Upper Cass, up around County Road 7. It's just east of Longville and just south of Reamer.
And what is it that you do with the lakes? What is it specifically that you're charged with in your responsibilities?
Well, one of the most important things we do is try to protect habitat. And of course, that we have to follow all applicable rules and ordinances. But another thing is to inventory fisheries. We have to know what's out there before we can, you know, prescribe any kind of management. So we do a lot of netting during the summer. In the winter, we write permits, you know, permits and reports. Because there's a lot of permits that are written for tournaments and aquatic plant nuisances. And our federal aid reports are lake surveys and stream surveys, lake management plans, and that's the least interesting part of it. Then the spring comes, and of course we've got a major egg take site up at the Pine River. and we bring those eggs to the Brainerd hatchery, and we hatch out, you know, we've got anywhere from, say, 60 to 100 million eggs in there. So that's a major part of it. So actually what we're doing is trying to manage habitat and the fisheries, and sometimes we implement regulations to control the harvest. You know, there you're working with the behavior of anglers, and we need to do that for them, for their enjoyment.
I know that probably a lot of people don't realize that a lot of our lakes that are stocked with walleyes now really were not native walleye lakes. They got lakeshore groups, and people wanted to see walleyes in those particular lakes. So you do stock a lot of lakes that really didn't have walleyes, for example, in them as part of their natural habitat, did they?
Right, exactly. There's probably about 4 lakes that we stock walleye fry in that would normally have walleyes. The rest of them, it would just be, you know, very few walleyes, you know, from flowages maybe. But they won't reproduce in those other lakes. They're bass panfish lakes.
And I think most of the larger lakes now, if you look at Pelican in our area, Gull Lake, North Long, they all have lake associations. And those associations are very interested in, I think, a couple of things. One is preserving habitat to make sure that they're healthy lakes, but they're also interested in keeping a healthy population of fish in those lakes. So you get a lot of pressure in your area, don't you, to keep those stock numbers up?
Oh, definitely. One of the biggest issues, of course, is walleye stocking. So we do plenty of that in those lakes, and like I said, 54 lakes in our area are stocked with walleyes. But they're also interested in shoreline habitat, because that's a big issue these days, you know, with all the development going on, and outside influences from like the watershed. We got weather things happening, and deposition from weather. You know, there's a lot of impact on these lakes, and they're concerned about that.
And I suppose you don't want to particularly talk about this, but I know there's a lot of political pressure to meet the demands of what the expectations are around some of these lakes. And I'll just use, for example, Leech Lake, because I'm pretty familiar with that. We went through a period on Leech Lake where fishing was really, really tough, not only for walleyes, but for, you know, the perch population was down, I think, quite a bit. It seemed like it was down, but it rebounded, and it rebounded so fast that I have to think that those fish were there before. I don't know where they were, but we didn't see them. But I know I attended some of the sessions, the public sessions up there, and the DNR guys were beaten up pretty hard because they were accused of mismanaging the lake and not understanding what's going on in the lake. So you have that world of politics that crashes into the world of science, and it makes it tough for you, doesn't it, in those circumstances?
Well, it does. It's like a head-on couple of trains. But of course, we know that being that these are public resources, politics naturally would belong to this. And what we hope to do is to be able to continue to use science to manage it, to figure it out. So, and right now there's a group of folks working on Leech Lake Management Plan, and I understand they're really making a lot of headway. So,
and I think it's fair to say everybody's trying to do the right thing. I
yeah.
mean, it's not that anyone's trying to do bad things about it, but there's just differences in how the approach should be handled.
That's exactly right.
And I know that when we talk about the species that we have in Minnesota, there's 158 species listed off the DNR website, but you're saying that about 20 of those actually are invasive species, and they're not fish that we want. What are some of the kinds of invasive species that we're seeing across the state?
Well, you know, the common carp got in a long time ago, 100 years ago. You know, we've got those all over the place, and the ones that have not had wide distribution so far, the ones that are kind of locked up in the Great Lakes, like the round goby, the river ruff, those are species we don't want to see them getting anywhere else, because especially the river ruff can outcompete yellow perch, and of course that's the species we need for predator management as prey.
And it must be a really challenging job to try to figure out a lake like Mille Lacs, really what's going on in that lake. I mean, it's got to be, that's a tough job, isn't it, to try to figure out what the biomass is, how many perch are in there, or tulipies, or, yeah. I mean, it's not an exact science, is it?
No, it isn't exact. That's why we have to do surveys. There's really not much of an opportunity for a complete census. You can't count the fish. So we have to rely on science to be able to sample enough, get enough sampling and statistical power that we can say pretty close to what's there. And we need to know that because we're also dividing the safe harvest with the Indian band too.
And if you look at a lake like Gull, I know in discussions with you in the past, you said that you have to be concerned about how many fish you stock because you need to have enough biomass, enough minnows and bait in that particular body of water to support the fish that you're putting in there. And Gull in particular, I think we're seeing more and more small fish and maybe fewer large fish. And did you see sometime in the future where there's going to be maybe slot limits on almost all of our lakes?
Well, you know, what may happen over time is that if we find enough, or let's say a small grouping of regulations that work well, like a toolbox, and if we can apply those to most lakes across the state, we may see something like that. I think we're a ways out with that. There's the research is continuing, and we're seeing some successes and some not so good. But I would think that a special regulation for Gull Lake would be in the possibilities
Down the road.
Sure.
Well, one of the things that is absolutely scary is the introduction of this VHS, this virus that's occurred. I know they found evidence here a week ago or so that it's in Lake Superior. Could you tell us a little bit about VHS, what it is, and why should we be so afraid of it?
Sure. It's VHS stands for Viral Hemorrhagic Septicemia. It's been around a long time in Europe, and we've known about it in this country, but we haven't had it. And we believe it came in with the ocean-going vessels. It's a very serious disease, and there's really no cure for it. A virus, you don't treat for viruses, and especially in a wild situation. But what it can do is cause lake-wide kills of a species of fish. And we've seen some very large die-offs of fish by species. We've seen it in drum, black crappies, bluegills. There's been some huge die-offs in the Great Lakes, you know, Lake Champlain and up until now, most of the other Great Lakes, not Lake Superior. And now that it's in Lake Superior, we have to be very careful about, we've got a cold water hatchery there, the French River hatchery. We can no longer stock trout that have been raised there anywhere else in the state.
Because of the possibility it could pick that up.
Right, not only that, but of course we've got all those other exotic species too. VHS is something that it can be transferred so easily. You won't even know it's there. You can't see a virus. So what people really have to do, and they might just as well right now get very serious about this, do not transport water from one lake to another. Do not take live fish from one lake and put them in another. It's illegal anyway. And there is another way that naturally these fish could be moving the disease themselves, is just swimming upstream. And that's how they got into Lake Superior, more than likely. The flow is from Lake Superior to the Atlantic Ocean, but those fish are coming up from the lower end and coming into Lake Superior. So it's a migrational thing.
And what does it actually do to the fish?
It causes them to basically bleed to death. Wow. We've got some pictures, and what you'll see is they have some abnormal behavior, like swimming in circles on the surface of the water and very listless. You'll see hemorrhages in the skin and the fins and the eyes. Sometimes you'll see the eyes will pop out, kind of the Popeye appearance. But the other thing that's noteworthy is when they first get this, they may not even show the symptoms, and they've got it. They can be carriers too. So
you could pick up 3 or 4 fish, put them in your bait well, and take off with them and have no idea that you've got them. And they do not cause problems for humans, do they?
No, humans are not affected.
So it's just the risk of transporting that virus to another body of water. If it hit a body of water of, say, a lake of 500 acres, is it likely that it would wipe out the entire lake, or is it selective?
It's fairly selective. I think that when it hits a lake, it's going to affect certain species. There is a kind of a continuum of one species down to the next species of susceptibility. And they're not all as susceptible. Bluegills are exceptionally susceptible.
They are susceptible.
Right.
And I guess the hope is at some time that these fish could build up a resistance to that, but we don't know for a fact that will happen, do we?
No, we don't know that, but that's how viruses act. But we're not sure what's going to happen. Let's say in our time, it's a fairly recent thing that we've got these disease.
I know that we have on the website says about 386 bait dealers. in Minnesota, minnow dealers for the most part, and this is something that could really affect their business, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah, and the bait business is very important to fishing, you know, for all of our activities, and they're going to have to get some training. In fact, our department, the folks in St. Paul Central Office are working on that now. Probably something in March, all the bait dealers will be notified to go to training.
And obviously, if you don't know that you've got it at all the times, I would guess the biggest issue for right now is where they're purchasing bait or where they're trapping it.
Right. As it is now, I know that a lot of the bait dealers around here last year needed to take a sample of what they were catching or something from a lake that they were going to trap, and they had to get it tested first. We helped them with that. We went out fishing for perch one day just to help those guys get started. And you know, what they like to do is in the spring early, as soon as the ice is gone, they're after the spot-tail shiners. And that's a very short run, so they need to get those sampled and disease-free certification before they start selling them. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's a tight thing.
Wow. So hopefully we don't see that in Minnesota, but it's in Wisconsin. It's getting very close, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. There are inland lakes in Wisconsin and Michigan that have this disease. Lake Winnebago had a huge drum die-off a number of years ago.
Now, stocking is a big part of what you do.
Yes.
And you stock, what is it that you stock? When you work with walleyes, you stock a variety of different ages, don't you? It's not one particular age.
Right. Yeah, we stock fry in the spring. Those are fish that are hatched right out of our hatchery. Within 24 hours of their hatching, they're stocked. We'll be stocking lakes and walleye rearing ponds. And then we stock fingerlings, and these are fish that are about 20 to the pound on average, and we put the fry in small ponds and let them grow out until the fall, and then we stock them. And now we're trying an experiment on frylings. Hopefully, what we're hoping to do is we can get more survivors in the rearing pond situation. Instead of getting 2 or 10%, maybe we'll get higher than that and potentially contribute to the fishery better. So yeah, we stock several sizes.
If you stock a lake like Pelican or Gull Lake, do you have any estimates of how many of those will actually survive into adulthood?
You know, that's kind of a moving target. It all depends on the number of fish surviving from the previous year, because it's a very dynamic system. But we think, you know, we could probably get 10 or 20%. I think 20% is probably way on the high side, but I think 1 to 10%. But if you look at Pelican Lake and Gull Lake, and you know, we need to evaluate that. We don't want to wait 4 years until those fish are big enough to get in a gill net. So we use electrofishing in the fall, and we just go along the shoreline and, you know, 2 to 3, 4 feet of water, and we see tremendous survival of those walleyes, way better than when we just stocked fingerlings in them. Just it's been very successful.
Now, that would be probably your number one fish that you stock is walleyes.
Yeah, by numbers it sure is.
And then what would be the next species that you stock?
The various species of trout.
Trout?
Yeah, we stock 3 different species of stream trout, and we've got lake trout too.
And there's concern, I know, about the lake trout, and we'll get to that in just a little bit, but whether people believe that climate is changing or not, the science is showing that our lakes are warming up, aren't they?
Definitely.
And which is affecting those lake trout. We'll come back to that in a minute.
Sure.
There's a lot of politics in stocking too, isn't there?
Yes,
I mean,
there is.
people want their lake stocked. I guess it depends on how much pressure is on a particular lake, but do you try to have do you have a plan, a 2 or 3 year, 4 year plan with each lake where you stock it and then you monitor to see how the stocking is doing before you determine if you should put that amount in the next year or the year after?
Oh yeah, we've got a lake, it's called a Fisheries Lake Management Plan. We've got basically one of those for every one of our lakes, whether we stock it or not. And that kind of prescribes what we're going to be doing from year to year. Tells us, basically, we write down the prescription for stocking and what we're going to do to evaluate that stocking. So yeah, that's a very live system. We use that very actively.
Now, rusty crayfish is another invasive species, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And is that common in all of the central Minnesota lakes?
No, not very common.
It is, I know it's in Leech Lake.
Yeah, Leech Lake, and I know Woman Lake's got it. I don't think there are any lakes in the Brainerd area, our part of Cass County and Crow Wing County. I don't know of any.
Now, they get a little bigger than probably our traditional species, don't they?
Yeah, a little bit bigger.
Can fish still eat them?
They will.
I suppose at the smaller stages
Smallmouth
they will.
bass, and yeah, there's
Yeah.
not a lot of species that eat them, but there are some,
Yeah.
sure.
When you look at a lake like Gull Lake, and you look at the pressure on the lake, are you able to kind of determine the age class of the fish, of the largest group of fish that's in the lake? Can you say, well, most of the fish in that lake are 2 or 3 year old fish, or is that really, really a stretch?
No, it's, you know, especially when they're younger fish, they're smaller, we can pretty much tell, because we net that lake a lot. We do a lot of age and growth analysis. So, you know, we can pick up fish that are this big or that bigger, and we can tell you what year class they came from. When they start getting bigger, it gets dicey. Even to take a scale from a fish over 5 years old, it's going to be tough to read the annular growth rings on it.
Okay.
So when we sacrifice fish, like if we catch them in a gill net, they're probably going to be a dead sacrificed fish. We'll take the otolith bone out, and we're much more accurate.
And their age?
That way, yeah.
In determining their age.
But the small ones, we can look at them and pretty much tell you.
Well, one of the stocking issues that probably raises the most interest and the most heated debate is muskie fishing, or muskie stocking. And I know that this winter you've been looking at a debate going on in South Long Lake, because that's an area where there was discussion. There was discussion the last couple of years about maybe putting muskies in Gull. Right. What's that been like for you?
Well,
I think I know. But
it was like a pretty hot button that we touched there. And so far, really want to just find out what people thought about it, and I found out.
I bet you did.
Yeah. Yeah, we're still going to go ahead, though, with the process. It's a long process. And, and that process was just changed by the commissioner decided he wanted the public to have a greater opportunity to weigh in. And so what we're at, excuse me, right now we're at the point where we need to go to the ISACID work group. And what that ISACID means is Northern Pike and Muskie Management Work Group. It's a group of different organizations like Muskies Inc. and Northerns Incorporated and the Dark House Spears, you know, a number of groups. There's also a couple of DNR biologists in there. And we take that proposal before them and explain it and walk through it. And if they think there's some merit to that, we'll take it forward. And that means we would post signs at the public accesses on the opening day of fishing season this coming spring. And they would be, it would state on the signs that there'd be a meeting sometime 90 days after the signs went up.
I know that feeling with a lot of people. I know there's Lake Alexandria and Chaminade have muskies in them now, yeah. Miltona to the west of us. And I know there's a lot of people that live on those lakes that feel those muskies have affected the populations of the fish. And yet you talk to other people who say, you know, the walleye fishing is really good yet, the pan fishing is really good, and it hasn't affected them. When you look at a lake and you look to potentially stock it, what is the primary food source for muskies when you look at these lakes in central Minnesota?
Well, muskies are sight feeders, and they're mostly looking for soft fin-rayed fish, like ciscos, white suckers, red horse, fish that don't have the spines. But they will eat perch too. As a matter of fact, you know, to be honest about it, a muskie will eat a fish. If it gets in front of it, they're hungry, they're an opportunist feeder too, they'll eat any fish. But they just do not favor the spiny-rayed fish. They're after the soft-rayed ones, which means they would probably eat small northern pike too.
Now, how many of our lakes in central Minnesota were native muskie lakes? I mean, Leech Lake would be one, I would guess, wouldn't it?
Well, definitely.
That was, I mean, they were found there naturally. What are some of the other, there aren't that many, are there, that were natural muskie lakes?
There's a lot of native muskie lakes on the upper end of the Mississippi watershed, like Woman Lake, Winnie, right, all those lakes up towards the headwaters, Lake Bemidji. We may have native muskie waters here, but we don't know. We haven't seen muskies in them. Before dams went in, I would think that like the South Long Lakes, there surely would have been muskies going up and down the Nocasippi River. There aren't any in there that we know of.
Okay.
But conjecture there a little bit.
So it's an ongoing debate, and you're looking at other potential lakes, but people will have ample opportunities to have input into that
They're
decision.
going to have a lot of input, you bet. And we're not going to just stuff this down their throats. It's going to be a public response thing.
Well, we're down just to the last couple of minutes.
Oh.
But we need to talk about this lake trout issue, because we are losing our lake trout, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. We're losing our ciscos too. There's a study going on Lake Pillager Lake right now, where they've got tags in fish where they can tell with a monitoring device what temperature water they're in. But on Gull Lake, we've done nettings there frequently since 1945, and they're almost disappearing. Right now, the average size is very large, and that's indicative of a low population.
So you take Gull Lake and you take, well, Mille Lacs and Leech Lake, they had ciscos, pretty large populations of ciscos. Right. The warming of the water is making it so that it's tougher for them. At least that's what we're speculating.
Right. The surface waters are warming, and there's more organic material in the lakes that's being eaten up by bacteria, and so it's pinching those fish in the thermocline. Now, Mille Lacs Lake doesn't have a thermocline; it's polymictic. So, but Gull Lake does. And what we're finding is the period of stratification, when between the turnovers, is a lot longer.
So, and we have a graph here that we're going to show, but that range for these fish to live in is getting smaller, isn't it?
It is. It's pinching them in between the low oxygen and the warm water. It's getting tighter.
And so that's part of the reason we're losing lake trout?
Yes. We started stocking in the 80s up in Roosevelt Lake, and we no longer can do that. The water's just too warm, not enough oxygen, so they're out of the picture there.
And the Trout Lake is the same thing on the whitefish chain?
Big Trout Lake on the whitefish chain is doing okay, but it's turning marginal towards late summer now. We're monitoring that too. It's getting to the point where it warms up much more, and if we lose much more oxygen in the hypolimnia, that lower layer, then they're going to be in stress too, and we're probably going to lose that eventually.
Wow. So lake trout could be gone, ciscos could be gone. Those are all things that are happening, whether we believe that there's a change in the climate or not. Those are actual scientific facts, aren't they?
They're scientific facts. We've got a biologist working out of Bemidji he's been monitoring that for several years. And our net catches of ciscos in the lakes are at all-time lows everywhere.
Wow. Well, we've run out of time. This went faster than I thought it was going to go. If people want to get a hold of you, they can get a hold of the DNR through the area supervisory fisheries office.
Yes, you can.
And you have a website too for the state Minnesota DNR. So, sure. Tim, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Keep up the good work. I know you only got a few months and you're going to retire, and good luck in retirement.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.